Hello, everyone. How's FutureStack so far? Good? Good? Good morning session? Great. Great. Thank you. So this is the modern applications track, and hopefully you'll hear from a lot of great content, hopefully throughout the day, throughout the rest of the afternoon. Let's start out with, I want to talk about how to keep your modern applications performing. Well, you have a problem. It's your big day. It's the day of the new product launch, Black Friday, Election Day. Whatever day it is, it's the busiest day of the year for you. The day of the year when your company either makes it or breaks it. You hold your breath. Can you scale? Can you stay operational? Will you even survive? Well, you've been anticipating this, but, are you really ready? Well, let's find out. Let's go into the perspective of your customer for a moment. Let's pretend you're a customer. Today, the big game, and you've invited all your friends over to watch the game on your, match on your, I'm from the States, on your big screen TV. All is well until the lights go off, the power goes out, the game, the match for you and your friends is over. Well, at least it's over for you, not necessarily your friends, because they'll go somewhere else to watch it. But for you, the big day, the big event that you had scheduled is over. So you call the power company, and you don't get the most sympathetic response from them. You're not happy with the power company. They didn't meet your expectations. And your customers are not happy with you when you fail in the same sort of way. Unhappy customers don't buy from you anymore. And most importantly, unhappy customers tell other people. Behind every app, behind every modern app, there are teams. Not just developers, but there's operations, customer support, executives, marketing, teams of all shapes, teams of all sizes. Running a digital business nowadays is a team sport, and this team sport requires data. And to do their job, these teams have to ask important questions of their application. They need to respond to issues and problems. They need to know what to do to make the application successful, and they need the tools necessary to make that happen. But what tools do they need? And how do you know you have the right information to take advantage of all those tools? Modern applications, they're constantly changing, constantly improving, constantly growing in order to meet the needs of their customers. Keeping your application running and available and meeting the needs of your customers is not easy. It involves many different tools, processes, and many different technologies. I want to talk about 4 critical tools and processes that are needed to keep a modern application running and keeping it well modern. First, I want to talk about dynamic infrastructure. In the old days of running an application, you ran applications in what I'd call static data centers. All the systems were well-defined, the computers were well laid out, each had names, they were in spreadsheets, they were easy to manage, easy to control, easy to understand. Your operations team knew exactly what it took to keep these sets of systems running. They had playbooks, this system, this playbook, this system, this playbook. Simply looking at the servers, looking at CPU utilization and memory utilization, they could easily tell whether the server was performing the way it was supposed to and whether the application was working the way it was supposed to. Everything was level, smooth. A change was an indication of a problem. Change was bad. But in the new world, our applications are much more dynamic. They're more sophisticated and serve really a more sophisticated customer. Our static data centers simply don't handle that anymore. We're outgrowing them. In the new world, resources are created dynamically. The cloud allows us to request and consume resources on demand. The world of the operations team can no longer be as simple as looking at a list of resources in a spreadsheet and knowing what to do when something goes wrong. The resources they're responsible for are dynamic and they're transient. their world has gotten a lot more complicated. Building dynamic infrastructures in the cloud allows you to scale your application better. It also allows you to make changes to your application faster and easier. And both of these ultimately result in higher availability and, quite frankly, greater value to your customers. Dynamic infrastructures are critical to building dynamic, modern applications. The way you've built things in the past, the tools you've used in the past just don't apply anymore. That's dynamic infrastructure. Let's move on to another tool for modern applications, and that's modern risk management. Managing risk is not as easy as it used to be. There's a risk of standing on this one platform here. Risk is a much more complex issue than it used to be. It requires more modern techniques in order to manage. So I want to demonstrate this by giving you a real-life example of risk management that went bad. This is an overheard conversation that I'm going to talk about. It was a report by an operations engineer to the rest of the team about something that they were doing. And see if you can see where the problem is. We were wondering how changing a setting on our MySQL database might impact our performance. But we were worried that the change may cause our production database to fail. Good, right? Thinking ahead of time. Since we didn't want to bring down production, we decided to make the change to our backup or replica database instead. Test it there instead. After all, it wasn't being used for anything at the moment anyway. You, of course, know exactly what happened next. The random act of nature occurred, and we remembered then why we had a backup database. We remember why the backup was needed. This really was a true story, by the way. This did happen. And this problem is a result of bad planning and of bad decision making. It's a result of not understanding the stresses that your applications are on, and as a result of not understanding the inherent risk in performing an operation such as that. Understanding and managing risk is core to managing modern applications. And all systems have risk in them. There's a risk that a server will crash. There's a risk that a database will get corrupted. There's a risk of a network problem. There's risk of software failing, or a risk of just simply some piece of software returns the wrong answer. Risk is a measure of the likelihood of a surprise occurring. So on the surface, keeping a system available requires seemingly to remove risk, which means removing surprises. But systems have become, of course, much more complicated, and that really isn't possible. It hasn't been possible for a long time. It certainly isn't possible anymore. Removing risk is not a viable option. You will always have risk. But living with risk in a large, highly available application, modern application, is really about managing what your risk is, knowing what the risk is, and knowing it ahead of time, understanding what your issues are that you need to think about, managing how much risk is acceptable to you and to your organization, and making that visible, and knowing what you can do to mitigate that risk and reduce its impact if it ever happens. This is standard risk management stuff. It's at the heart of building modern applications today. And it's not about removing risk. It's about mitigating risk. Understanding and mitigating risk is not the same thing as removing risk, and it's important to keep in mind. Knowing your risk and understanding the value of that risk and the impact it has potentially to you, that's what's important. Risk management is about two things to keep track of: the likelihood of a risk occurring and the severity if that risk actually occurs. Knowing those two things about every risk in your system, at least all that you can possibly think of, is important, Because once you have those two pieces of information for every risk, you can then put a plan together, an appropriate plan together, about what to do if that risk item occurs. And having a plan for a known risk in many ways is just as good and certainly easier to accomplish than to remove the risk in the first place. Likelihood, severity, and plan. These are the three cornerstones of modern risk management. Risk management was the second tool. The third is the power and strength of DevOps and the DevOps culture that can bring to your organization. So let's talk a little bit about what DevOps is, but starting out really what DevOps is not. DevOps is not a change to your product or how your product is made or built. It's not what it is. DevOps is not just a set of process and procedural changes. It's much more than that. And DevOps is not something that you migrate to or institute. It's not something you impose. It's not that simple either. DevOps is nothing short of a cultural transformation that has to occur within your organization. It's a change to your entire organization, all parts of your organization. It's a change to how your organization thinks and behaves. It's a core flush, the inside out of how your organization works and how it builds modern applications. DevOps changes how your organization builds and develops applications, certainly, how and when your organization deploys those applications and manages customer expectations about change, how your organization monitors and evaluates how your application is performing, and how your organization responds to problems that occur within your application. DevOps is really about ownership, team-level ownership, individual-level ownership of problems and of capabilities, top to bottom within your within an application. It's about ownership. In order to build ownership at the team level, you must build tooling that allows those teams to have the ownership they need in order to facilitate their ownership of the problems that they're dealing with. I don't believe this can be done without embracing dynamic infrastructure and the dynamic cloud either. I think those two tools, that tool is necessary in order to embrace DevOps. In other words, adopting DevOps means adopting the cloud. And adopting the cloud means adopting DevOps. They're mutually symbiotic. They go together. They're integrated concepts. You cannot successfully adopt DevOps without adopting dynamic infrastructures, which means adopting the cloud. You cannot successfully bring the cloud into your organization and take advantage of all the capabilities that a dynamic infrastructure that the cloud has without also adopting a DevOps culture within your organization. In short, you can't modernize your application without DevOps and without the cloud. Can't do it. I firmly believe that. You cannot succeed with one without embracing the other. But it's not just the cloud. The cloud is the first step of the tooling problem. But you must adopt a full DevOps tool chain, every step of the process. You've seen this picture before. Every step of the process. And it must be an efficient and highly integrated set of tools. Those tools also need owners. People say, oh, we don't have DevOps teams. We don't have DevOps teams. You don't have DevOps teams. Every team is a DevOps team. But you do have tooling teams, and those teams are critical to keeping the rest of the organization working. The tool chain must be efficient, and it must involve a highly integrated set of tools. And most importantly, the tools themselves also have to be monitored. Monitoring is obviously a step in the tool chain, but the tool chain itself has to be monitored. You can't truly provide a good set of tools to your organization that allows you to implement DevOps unless you know whether those tools are working the way they need to work. You need to accept the ownership required for DevOps cultural transformation in order for this to be important. The DevOps transformation needs all three of these principles. It must be based on an entire organization-level cultural change. It must fully embrace and utilize the cloud to be successful. And it must have a fully automated, integrated, and monitored toolchain. Only with all three of these can your organization be successful at building a DevOps culture. That's DevOps. Last but not least, in keeping modern applications running, is instrumentation and monitoring for the application itself. Problems can come from anywhere. Continuous monitoring using built-in instrumentation allows you to anticipate and predict problems before they happen, right? We all know about that. In other words, analyze trends and understand when trends go sideways in your applications. It also allows you to notice when problems occur and acknowledge that and generate alerts. We use monitoring and instrumentation for both of these things. Some people think this is where it stops, but people who really have solid instrumentation knows that the third one, which is once you have problems identified, using instrumentation as a tool to understand in depth what's causing the problem to occur and be able to use that to find and fix your problem in the first place is a critical aspect of monitoring as well. Reducing mean time to detection and reducing mean time to resolution are critical measures in modern applications that your instrumentation and analytics package will help you find, help you reduce those numbers. If you don't have visibility into your application and have access to the data you need at the time you need it, you'll waste time firefighting because you won't know where the problem is. You'll do meaningless finger pointing across your teams. You talk about DevOps ownership with teams. That goes away if you don't know whether a problem is in one team versus another team. Meaningless finger pointing. You'll lose money because whenever problems occur, things aren't working for your customers. You'll make your customers themselves unhappy, of course, and unhappy customers tell other people. Modern applications need monitoring at multiple levels with different granularity needs. Imagine we have an e-commerce website. We have some sort of mobile app over there that we're using. Now, Bob comes along and he uses his phone, and he buys something, and that transaction took 300 milliseconds. That's great. He's happy. Everything's fine. But Sally logs in and does the exact same thing, but this time there's a short little database problem, and her transaction took a lot longer. It took 4.5 seconds. She's not a happy customer. Availability isn't just whether a page responds, but how long it takes to respond. Customer doesn't care why a problem occurred. They don't care why your app is slow. If it doesn't meet their expectations, it's a failure. The problem is, when we typically look at our applications and see how they're running, we more or less have a view like this. On average, things seem to be looking okay. Everything seems to be running fine. On average, it worked pretty well most of the time. The details are where the problem lies. The details are where availability problems are born. The real answer to how your application is doing is not just wishing and hoping and looking at this and saying things look fine. It's not an average, it's in the details. Modern application monitoring can't be done by simply looking from the outside in. It can't be done with average data, it can't be done with sample data. It requires collecting data from all areas of your application and from every single transaction that your application is performing. Every transaction, everywhere throughout the application, ends up being tons and tons and tons of data. In fact, you typically need to collect more monitoring data than data that is used, the business data within your application itself. You collect more monitoring data, typically, than the business data that your application is using. It grows, and it grows continuously as time goes on. Every day, every second. Everything that anyone does to your application generates data that's necessary for analyzing how the application is doing. Generates performance data. If anybody is using your application, you must collect data about exactly how they're using it and how the infrastructure behind it is working. All of it is important. It's all parts of your applications, whether it's servers or applications or the user experience or whether it's meeting business needs. Everything generates data that must be analyzed together. It really is a big data problem of its own. It really is all about the data. You also need to write data. You need to know how your application is performing, for the application itself and how it's performing. But you also need to know, am I open for business? Simple basic questions like that. But are the customers getting the experience that they want and they expect? And is it meeting your business needs, meeting your business objectives? It doesn't matter if the app's working well if you're not making money. It doesn't matter if the app's working well if the customers don't like it and it's not meeting what their needs are. But you can't meet the customer's needs, and you certainly can't meet your business needs if the app itself just isn't working. All three are important. You need to monitor the right components, you need to monitor the right data, and all of the data. And success involves all three types of analytics. Is the software working? Is it meeting the customer's needs? And is it meeting the business needs? All three of these things are interconnected. So this is a measurement framework that we talk a lot about. All aspects of this framework are important to your overall business success. Again, whether you're talking about the application, the customer experience, the business value, we were talking about how your services are running, or DevOps, how your DevOps processes and systems that your developers are using, how they're working. By combining data from all of these experiences, all of these interactions, only then can you really know how your modern applications are performing. Every team involved in this is, again, this isn't just development teams, right? It's DevOps, it's your operations, it's your developers, it's DevOps, it's marketing, it's sales, business leaders. Everyone is involved in this process of keeping your modern application running. So instrumentation is critical, fourth step. So dynamic infrastructure, managing risk, DevOps culture, and instrumentation. These are the four critical tools and processes for keeping your modern application working and keeping it modern. Our customers are demanding modern applications from us. And modern applications require modern technology. But technology is not just what we think technology is. It's about modern infrastructure, it's about modern processes and procedures, and it's about modern monitoring. Because this model of making sure your site works has never worked, but certainly doesn't work anymore. And we certainly don't want this, even though many of us have this more often than we like to admit, that we'd like to have. Keeping applications running involves modernizing your entire enterprise, modernizing your processes and procedures, your teams, modernizing your culture, not just modernizing the code in the application itself. Thank you.